The morning began like any other at the Caldwell Military Academy, a prestigious institution tucked deep into the New Hampshire woods, its granite buildings lined with plaques commemorating decorated generals, admirals, and valiant cadets. The academy halls echoed with ambition and entitlement, mostly filled with the children of legacy families and high-ranking officials. Among the bustling footsteps and perfectly pressed uniforms, one figure moved quietly, barely acknowledged by those around her. Janice Holloway, the academy's 58-year-old black janitor, pushed her cart along the polished floors, her coat flapping slightly with each step. It was a heavy, olive-drab field jacket, weathered and patched, clearly out of place among the elite. Students often whispered about Janice's coat, especially the strange, almost unrecognizable patch above the left breast. The edges were frayed, and the stitching had faded into the same dusty green as the rest of the garment, but it was visible enough to draw ridicule. She probably bought it at a thrift store, one cadet sneered, nudging his friend as they passed her near the mess hall. Vintage war chic, another joked, laughing as they mimicked her limp and the slow, deliberate way she pushed her mop bucket. Janice said nothing. She never did. She just kept working, one hallway at a time, every movement careful, measured. Beneath her silence lay decades of discipline and pain, of nights spent in places that never appeared on maps. But to the Caldwell cadets, Janice was invisible, a fixture of the background like the baseboards or vending machines. It didn't help that she avoided eye contact and barely spoke, keeping to herself and her routine. Still, her coat was a constant source of curiosity and derision. No one could figure out the insignia. It didn't look like any standard unit, and some assumed it was fake. One particularly loud student, Cadet Brian Harkis, made it his mission to taunt her whenever he saw her. "Hey, Sergeant Holloway," he called out once during lunch cleanup, using the title with exaggerated sarcasm. "Clean up in our desert storm?" The laughter from nearby cadets was loud, performative, and designed to reach her ears. Janice glanced briefly in his direction, then turned back to wiping down the tables. Her hands bore scars from burns and a fracture long ago improperly set, but they still worked with precise intention. She took a quiet breath. The dining hall, once filled with noise, seemed to dull for a moment, just long enough for the sting of old memories to surface. Behind Janice's coat, behind her silence and scars, was a truth few could even begin to comprehend. Once, she had worn a different uniform, one without name tags or public records. A uniform issued only to operatives tasked with missions that would never be declassified. The coat she wore now had belonged to someone else. Someone she had loved. Someone who hadn't come back. But none of the cadets knew that. To them, she was just the janitor in the old army jacket. Just a woman who walked with a limp and smelled faintly of bleach. That afternoon, the academy prepared for a high-level inspection. A decorated general, General Colton Vance, newly promoted and known for his stern demeanor, was scheduled to visit the campus. The commandant's staff buzzed with nervous energy. Cadets polished their boots and adjusted their uniforms with uncommon urgency. Janice continued her routine silently, scrubbing the base of a trophy case in the entry hall where a large portrait of General Vance already hung in anticipation. A few of the cadets stood nearby, joking quietly as they observed her kneeling to clean. "Don't scuff the general's shoes with your thrift store mop," Harkis muttered loudly enough for several people to hear. A few cadets laughed, trying to hold it in. Janice didn't react. She stood, her back creaking from years of hard labor, and began rolling her cart down the hall toward the staff wing. The halls gleamed with fresh wax, but her coat stood out like a relic, drawing glares from senior staff. As she passed an aide in full uniform, the woman wrinkled her nose slightly and offered a passive-aggressive smile. "We'll need these halls clear before the general arrives, Miss Holloway," she said crisply. "Yes, Janice replied in a quiet voice that carried a strength even she had forgotten she possessed. She wheeled her cart into the janitorial closet and closed the door behind her. Inside, she sat down on a folding stool, resting for a moment as a tremor passed through her hand. She reached into her coat and withdrew a faded photograph, 3 women and 4 men in sand-covered tactical gear, standing next to an unmarked chopper in a desert. Only one face was clearly visible, hers. Young, hardened, and deadly. The others were gone now. All but her. Outside the closet, the cadets waited. One of them, Emily Thompson, a junior cadet from Ohio, glanced back toward the door and frowned. "That coat's weird," she murmured. "What if she's actually, not just a janitor?" Harkis scoffed. "What, you think she's some kind of war hero? Please. She's been here for 10 years. If she was anything special, we'd have heard about it. Trust me." He marched off toward the grand staircase, where General Vance was expected to arrive within the hour. Janice emerged a moment later, pulling her coat close, unaware that today would not follow the usual routine. The general's car pulled into the circular drive at exactly 2 p.m. He exited with practiced authority, flanked by aides, his medals shining under the afternoon sun. Inside the lobby, cadets stood at attention, forming a neat row of anticipation and nerves. Janice, arms full of cleaning cloths, slipped quietly into the far corner of the hallway, hoping to finish wiping the trophy glass before anyone noticed. But Harkis did. He saw her there, wearing that same coat, and decided to take things further. He raised his voice. "Better hide your mop, Holloway. Wouldn't want the general to mistake you for someone who matters." The words echoed for a moment too long, bouncing off marble walls and polished floors. Janice froze. The cadet snickered. But just as Harkis opened his mouth for another remark, General Colton Vance stepped inside. The noise evaporated. Cadets snapped to attention. Senior staff stiffened. The general walked with the confidence of a man who had commanded battlefields and boardrooms alike. His gaze swept over the row of students, over the polished floors, the grand staircase, and then, abruptly, it landed on Janice. On her coat. On the nearly invisible patch over her heart. He stopped walking. His aides faltered beside him, confused. The silence grew dense. Janice, stunned, looked up from her rag. Her eyes met the general's for a split second before darting away. But he continued staring, breath stilled, mouth slightly parted. His hand dropped to his side, eyes locked on the patch like he was seeing a ghost. Slowly, in full view of the entire entrance hall, General Vance straightened his shoulders, and with deliberate, practiced precision, he raised his right hand and saluted. Not casually. Not symbolically. A formal, military salute. The room seemed to shudder. Harkis's face paled. The staff exchanged confused glances. Janice didn't move at first. Her body froze in shock, heart hammering against her ribs. Then, slowly, she stood. Her hand, though arthritic and still trembling, lifted in return. Her salute was sharp. Perfect. Reflexive. As if the years fell away and her training returned. The general's eyes were glassy now. "Staff Sergeant Holloway?" he asked softly. "Unit, Shadow Wind 12. A gasp rippled through the hallway. Janice nodded, her voice catching. "Yes, sir." General Vance dropped his salute, but not his reverence. He said firmly, "It was your team that got us out of Lascar Valley. 2002, unmarked evac route. I was there. You were the one on Overwatch. You kept the corridor open when the lead convoy got hit." His voice cracked slightly. "I never knew your name until now." Janice blinked, stunned. Her hands shook again, but not from age. The memories were back, gunfire, radio static, sand in her teeth, the screams of a medic calling for airlift. "We lost good people that day," she whispered. "You saved 43, the general replied. "Including me." The room was still. Even Harkis stood paralyzed. No one laughed now. The gravity of the moment had pulled the air from the building. General Vance turned to face the commandant. "Why is she cleaning floors?" he demanded, voice hard. The commandant stammered, flustered. She's been working here for years, sir. We weren't aware, her service record was never." Vance's expression darkened. "Because missions like hers were buried. She didn't just serve. She served where others wouldn't even dare." General Vance turned back toward Janice, his tone softening but never losing its weight. "I owe you more than I could ever repay. And I believe this institution owes you an apology." He faced the gathered cadets and staff. "This woman isn't just a veteran. She's a legend. You've been walking past a hero every day and never once bothered to ask who she was." Janice stood speechless, her heart thudding so loudly she thought others might hear it. Her coat suddenly felt less like a relic and more like a shield reclaimed. The commandant stepped forward, looking completely shaken. "Staff Sergeant Holloway, I deeply regret our oversight. Had we known," General Vance cut him off. "You didn't ask. That's the problem. This coat." He pointed to the patch. "It doesn't show up in databases. It doesn't have a public citation. But those of us who served in Black Ops know what it means. Shadow Wind operated under triple-blind authorization. They didn't even get to wear their own names." He turned back to Janice. "Permission to speak privately, Janice nodded slowly, still overwhelmed. The general guided her gently toward a nearby hallway alcove while the rest of the lobby remained in stunned silence. After that mission, Vance began quietly, "We thought none of you survived. Only learned later that 3 of your team made it out. I looked into it, couldn't find a single record. You just disappeared." Janice's voice was barely above a whisper. "They scrubbed our files after Kandahar. Said it was for national security. My benefits were classified along with everything else. I didn't fight it, I was just tired." Vance's jaw tightened. "That ends today." He pulled out his phone, his fingers moving with urgency. "I still hold clearance. I'll file an executive-level appeal and request immediate declassification for personnel records related to Lascar Valley and Shadow Wind 12. You will be recognized, and you will be compensated. That is a promise." Janice blinked back sudden tears. She had fought so long, silently, forgotten by the very country she bled for. But now, finally, someone saw her. Not just anyone. Someone who mattered. Someone who remembered. When they returned to the lobby, the cadets were still gathered, subdued and uneasy. General Vance stepped in front of them. "There will be changes," he announced. "Effective immediately, Staff Sergeant Janice Holloway is to be honored as Coldwell's resident hero in residence. Her contributions will be formally included in the Academy's curriculum. And she will never clean another floor here again." The applause didn't come all at once. It started hesitantly. But then the room erupted. Cadets who had mocked her days before now clapped with red faces and lowered gazes. The janitor had become the legend. The following week, a ceremony was held on the Coldwell Academy lawn. Rows of cadets stood in dress uniform, a podium set against the backdrop of the memorial wall, a tall slab of black marble etched with the names of Coldwell's finest. At the center, a new section had been prepared. Janice stood beside General Vance, wearing the same olive drab coat, but now with a newly issued metal ribbon bar and a unit pin that gleamed under the sun. The crowd hushed as the general stepped up to speak. "Today," Vance began, "we acknowledge what should have been honored long ago. Behind every operation the world never hears about, there are people who sacrificed more than time or safety. They sacrificed identity, recognition, even their future stability." He gestured to Janice. "Staff Sergeant Holloway's record has now been formally restored. Her unit's contribution, once classified, has been verified. And today, her name joins the ranks of those Coldwell reveres, not as a janitor, but as a soldier." Applause followed, solemn and respectful. Janice's hands trembled as the curtain was pulled away. There it was. Janice Holloway, Staff Sergeant, Shadow Wind 12, Lascar Valley Evacuation 2002. The letters were etched with such precision, such permanence, that they almost didn't feel real. She stared at the inscription for a long time, waves of memory rolling through her. She thought of Malcolm, her unit leader, who had died holding the line. Of Rivera, who took a bullet meant for her. Of the 6 others whose names remained unspoken, their service still buried. This was for them too. After the ceremony, dozens approached her, cadets, instructors, even the commandant himself. Each offered apologies, handshakes, or heartfelt thanks. Harkis was among them, his bravado nowhere to be found. He stepped forward nervously. He began, eyes downcast. I was wrong. I judged without knowing. I'm sorry." Janice looked at him for a long moment. "It's not about being sorry," she said. "It's about seeing better. Learning better." He nodded silently. And in that moment, something shifted in him, perhaps the first real lesson he'd learned at Coldwell. In the weeks that followed, a new plaque was installed inside the Academy's Hall of Valor, detailing the history of Shadow Wind 12 in carefully declassified fragments. Cadets were now required to study unconventional warfare, not just through tactics, but through lived experience. Janice, invited to speak on occasion, found her voice growing stronger with each story shared. It felt strange, stepping out of the shadows. But it also felt right. For the first time, her past was not a secret. It was a lesson. A legacy. One brisk morning, as autumn leaves scattered across the Academy grounds, Janice received a call from General Vance's office. His aide asked if she could come by headquarters, there was something she needed to see. Curious and a bit apprehensive, Janice made her way across the parade field, still wearing her now famous coat. She was ushered into a private conference room where General Vance stood, holding a small folder. He greeted her with a warm nod and gestured to a seat across from him. "I wanted to give you this personally," he said, sliding the folder across the table. Inside were 2 photographs, one black and white, the other new and vibrant. The first showed her former teammate, Sergeant Malik Jackson, smiling under a helmet, dust clinging to his chin strap. The second was of a young woman in graduation robes. Her name's Alicia. She's his daughter, Vance said. We found her last month. Until now, she believed her father died in a training accident. But with the limited declassification, we were able to tell her part of the truth. Janice stared at the photographs, emotion tightening her throat. Malik had been her closest friend in the unit, the one who made her laugh in moments of darkness. His daughter had his eyes. She's 23, Vance continued, studying political science. She'll be receiving her father's Silver Star next month in a private ceremony. She asked if you'd attend, said she'd like to meet the woman who fought beside her father. Janice's voice wavered. Of course. I'd be honored. It had been years since anyone from that time had truly come back into her life. The day of the ceremony arrived under a silver sky in D.C. The Pentagon Auditorium was smaller than Janice expected, but filled with quiet reverence. When Alicia Jackson took the stage to receive her father's medal, she locked eyes with Janice in the front row. Afterward, they embraced tightly. He used to write me letters, Alicia said, wiping away tears. But they never made much sense to me growing up. Now I understand. You were his sister in arms. Janice smiled through tears of her own. He was one of the best I ever knew. That moment sealed something inside her. A transformation. What had once been silence and sorrow had become connection and purpose. Alicia and Janice stayed in touch, exchanging stories and sharing parts of Malik's legacy. For Janice, it was like breathing life back into the shadows, turning grief into legacy. She returned to Coldwell with a sense of peace she hadn't known in decades. The cadets greeted her differently now. No longer just with politeness, but with quiet admiration and genuine interest. Her story had become a symbol of unseen courage. It wasn't long before the commandant reached out with a formal request. The academy was launching a new initiative, a curriculum edition focused on ethics, judgment, and the weight of unseen service. They wanted Janice to help design it. Not as a consultant, but as a co-author. We need more than theory, he said during their meeting. We need lived experience. And your story, that's what our cadets need to hear, need to feel, if they're ever going to truly understand leadership. Janice, stunned by the offer, hesitated only a moment before agreeing. Working alongside academy faculty, Janice helped draft a module titled Beyond the Uniform, Integrity in the Shadows. It explored what it meant to serve without recognition, to make decisions when no one's watching, to respect those whose service isn't defined by stripes or medals. She told stories, not about missions, but about moments. A field medic who used her body as a shield. A comrade who dismantled an enemy comms tower with a boot knife and sheer nerve. Lessons written not in ink but in blood, sweat, and silence. One day, while reviewing the course material, Janice noticed a new cadet sitting alone in the library lounge. The young woman looked nervous, eyes scanning the ethics module. Janice approached gently. First year? She asked. The cadet nodded. Yes. I was just reading about Shadow Wind. I didn't know units like that existed. Janice smiled. That was the point. We were never meant to be known. But the lessons still matter. The cadet looked up. Are you her? Sergeant Holloway? Janice chuckled softly. I suppose I am. From that day forward, cadets sought her out, not just for her past, but for her perspective. She taught them to question easy assumptions, to look beneath appearances, and to lead with humility. Her classroom wasn't bound by walls. It was the hallway, the mess hall, the lawn under the flagpole. Wherever she spoke, cadets listened. She never glamorized what she'd done. Instead, she emphasized the costs. The friends lost. The silence endured. The long fight to be seen. Respect, she told them often, isn't just saluting the rank. It's recognizing the weight others carry. By the end of that semester, the culture at Coldwell had changed. Janice's module was required for every graduating class. Faculty began integrating field veteran testimonials into their lessons. And most notably, cadets stopped walking past staff members without acknowledging them. The academy's core values, honor, duty, respect, no longer existed only in banners and speeches. They lived in daily practice. And Janice? She no longer walked with her head down. The coat still bore its patch, but now it also bore something more powerful, remembrance and recognition. Months passed in a steady rhythm of growth and reflection. One crisp winter morning, Janice arrived at her campus mailbox to find a small, cream-colored envelope tucked among the usual staff notices. It bore no return address, only her name, handwritten in a steady, deliberate script. She paused before opening it, feeling a strange weight in her chest. Inside was a single letter, neatly folded and yellowed at the edges. It had been sealed long ago, likely stored away in some forgotten file, and now, finally, had made its way home. The letter was dated 2002. It was from Major Malcolm Price, her unit commander and mentor, written just days before the Lascar Valley mission. "If this makes it to you," it began, "then something's gone wrong. And I won't be coming back." Janice's breath caught as she read his familiar words. "You always carried more weight than the rest of us, January. And you did it with grace. If I fall out there, I want you to keep going. Don't disappear. Don't let the silence consume you. Your story matters. Someday, someone will need it. And they'll need you to tell it." Her hands trembled. The whole way around her blurred. She pressed the letter to her chest, a raw ache blooming beneath her ribs. After all these years, his voice still knew exactly what she needed to hear. She walked slowly to the flagpole, where the Academy's morning colors had just been raised. For a long moment, she stood beneath the fluttering stars and stripes, eyes closed, remembering him. Remembering all of them. "I'm telling it now, Malcolm," she whispered. "I'm finally telling it." Word of the letter spread quietly through the faculty, and in a rare moment of emotional transparency, the commandant ordered a new tradition added to the Academy's annual commencement. From now on, each graduating class would leave a sealed letter to be opened only in the future, by cadets who came decades later, facing new wars, new uncertainties. A way to preserve not just tactics or titles, but human truths. Janice was asked to pen the first one. She did so with care, writing, "Respect silence, but never assume it means absence. Some heroes serve where no eyes can follow." At graduation that spring, Janice stood beside General Vance, watching a fresh class march across the parade field. Cadet Harkis, now a senior, wore a new expression, humbled, focused. As he received his diploma, he paused to shake Janice's hand. "Thank you," he said, no trace of irony left. "For everything." She nodded, squeezing his hand briefly. "Lead well," she replied. "And remember, rank is earned, but respect is chosen." He saluted her before stepping off the stage, his posture straighter than it had ever been. For the first time, she believed he'd understood. Later that summer, Janice made a quiet trip to Arlington National Cemetery. Tucked in a far-off corner, past the rows of marble headstones, was a small, unadorned plot marked only by a metal plaque with 3 initials, MP, for Malcolm Price. He had no formal headstone, no service date, and no listed unit. The burial had been expedited in secret after the mission. Janice knelt down on the warm grass and placed a folded Shadow Wind 12 insignia on the ground beside the plaque. "You're not invisible anymore," she whispered. "We're not." She stayed there for hours, telling him about the changes at Coldwell, about Alicia Jackson's graduation, about the cadets and the curriculum, and the long-delayed recognition they'd all begun to receive. It felt like confession. Like healing. 4 years, she had buried these moments deep beneath silence. Now, with each word, the weight seemed to lift. She laughed once, remembering how Malcolm used to scowl when the rations ran out of coffee. "They serve espresso at Coldwell now," she chuckled. "You'd hate it." As the sun began to lower in the sky, she stood and saluted the plaque. A simple, crisp movement. One final gesture for a man who had carried them through the darkest of missions. Then she turned, her coat flapping slightly in the breeze, and began walking down the gravel path between the rows of stones. Her gait, though still marked by the old wound in her knee, had strength to it now. Not just from therapy, but from peace. She was no longer walking alone. Back at the academy, Janice resumed her work, not with mop buckets or gloves, but with books, lectures, and mentorship. She taught cadets to honor every soul in a building, not just the ones with badges or stars. Her office, once a janitorial closet, had been transformed into a glass-walled space overlooking the quad. The coat still hung on a hook by the door, the patch now encased in a small frame beside it. Students often paused to look at it before entering. Many touched the glass, like it was sacred. One rainy evening, as she locked up her office, a young cadet ran through the hallway calling her name. "Oh, wait." He held out a crumpled paper. "I got accepted into Special Operations Prep. Your letter, the one in the commencement archives? It helped me decide. I want to serve the right way." Janice smiled gently. "Then carry your silence with honor. But never let it silence you." He nodded, eyes bright. As he ran off, she turned back to her office one last time, staring through the glass at the quiet world she had helped shape. 2 weeks later, a crisp white envelope arrived at Coldwell Academy's administrative office bearing the presidential seal. Inside was a formal letter addressed to Staff Sergeant Janice Holloway, Ret. She unfolded the paper slowly, scanning the elegant cursive font. The words struck her like a bolt of thunder. In recognition of extraordinary and unacknowledged service rendered to the United States of America, you are hereby invited to the White House to receive the Presidential Medal of Honor for civilian valor. Her knees weakened, and she sat down without realizing she had done so. When she entered the East Room a month later, the grandeur did not faze her. The chandeliers, the velvet ropes, the military band, they were window dressing. What mattered was who stood at the podium, the Commander-in-Chief himself, reading aloud words that had once been buried in classified files. Today we honor a woman who saved lives in silence, whose loyalty never wavered even when her country forgot her. A soldier, a mentor, a quiet giant, Staff Sergeant Janice Holloway. The room rose to its feet, thundering with applause. Her name echoed in a place where names mattered. Janice approached the stage with calm precision. The president leaned in as he placed the medal around her neck. "We failed you," he said quietly. "But the world knows now. Thank you for never giving up." She met his eyes and gave a small nod. She didn't need elaborate speeches. She didn't need praise. What she needed, she had finally been given: acknowledgement. Truth. Restoration. As she turned to face the crowd, she saw General Vance standing in the front row, tears shining in his eyes. He gave her a slow, proud salute. News of the ceremony spread across the country. Media outlets ran features titled "The Forgotten Hero" and "Janitor Turned Legend." But Janice refused interviews, declined offers for book deals or speaking tours. She returned home quietly, choosing instead to mentor in smaller circles, to pass her knowledge directly to those who could carry it forward. For her, glory was never the goal. Legacy was. Every cadet who walked through Coldwell's doors now did so under the shadow of her story, and with the duty to do better, see deeper, and lead wiser. On the anniversary of the Lascar Valley extraction, Coldwell hosted a candlelight memorial for Shadow Wind 12. Janice stood before the names of her fallen teammates, now etched on a black granite wall in the Academy's Garden of Valor. She lit a flame for each of them. For Malik. For Rivera. For Malcolm Price. For the unnamed. "You were never forgotten," she said softly. "They just didn't know where to look." Around her, cadets stood in uniform, heads bowed in reverent silence. It was no longer about her coat. It was about what it had always symbolized: unseen sacrifice, earned respect, and the quiet fire of justice. That winter, Janice received an unusual call from a colonel she'd once trained during the early ethics modules at Coldwell. He was now spearheading a new initiative, the military's first all-female special operations preparation program. "We need someone who's walked through fire," he told her. "Someone who knows what it's like to lead without being seen. Will you help?" At first, Janice hesitated. Her years in the shadows had left deep scars. But then she thought of the next generation, of young women walking into battlefields that hadn't yet learned to respect them. "I'll do it," she said. Training began at a remote base in Nevada. The candidates were sharp, driven, and diverse, some fresh out of academies, others seasoned infantry officers eager to break barriers. Janice stood before them in her simple fatigues, that same old coat slung over her shoulder. "You're not here to prove you belong," she told them. "You already do. What you're here to learn is how to lead without applause. To succeed when no one's watching. That's what makes you dangerous, and that's what makes you necessary." The room was silent, hanging on every word. She taught them more than tactics. She taught resilience, instinct, how to read a room without speaking, how to draw strength from the quiet places inside. The unit, dubbed Echo Valkyrie, quickly earned a reputation as one of the most cohesive and disciplined teams in the program's history. They began writing notes in chalk above their bunks, "Lead like Holloway." Janice caught sight of the phrase one morning and felt something bloom in her chest that no medal or salute had ever given her. She had become more than remembered. She had become a blueprint. One night, after a grueling desert exercise, one of the younger trainees approached her by the fire pit. When did you stop being afraid?" Janice stared into the fire for a long moment before answering. "I didn't," she said softly. "I just stopped letting fear make my decisions." The trainee nodded slowly, understanding more in that sentence than an entire semester's worth of doctrine. In that moment, Janice saw herself, not as she had been in the shadows, but as she was now, a firekeeper, passing on the flame. Years from now, long after her footsteps stopped echoing through the halls of Coldwell, long after the coat was placed in the Academy's glass-encased hall of service, cadets would still whisper her name with reverence. They wouldn't remember every detail of her missions, nor the full count of medals she finally earned. But they would remember how she made them feel, seen, responsible, and humbled. Because legends aren't always forged in battle. Sometimes, they're built in silence. And sometimes, the loudest legacy is worn on a coat no one wanted to ask about, until one general finally did. If this story moved you, if it made you reflect on how many heroes walk among us unseen, then you're exactly who we create these stories for. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful, untold stories of courage, redemption, and the human spirit. Let's honor the invisible legacies, together.